Hello, world. We are live once again. Welcome to the August 2024 edition of the Laravel Worldwide Meetup. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dan Sapelsa, and along with my co-host, Margaret Tavares, we are thrilled to once again bring you a couple of great talks this month from a couple of awesome members of our Laravel community. And speaking of my co-hosts, Margaret, how are you this month?
I am doing tremendous this month, Dan. Pretty excited for what's to come later this month.
Very excited, for our talks today, and then some events coming up later this month and then in the coming months. So before we get to our first talk, let's go over some community stuff here.
Awesome. Thank you. So running through some fantastic Laravel resources for anyone that's new here. So this great resource, Laravel News, is ran by Jake Bennett and Michael Drinda. So thank you so much. You can check them out at laravelnews.com. The latest article that I saw on there is what is up and coming in Laravel 8.4. So that's a great one to check out, as well as more news on other Laravel releases, tutorials, and happenings in the community. So please check that resource out. Up next, we got the Laravel podcast hosted by Matt Stouffer. And for this season, he also has Taylor Otwell joining him for all of season 6. So the latest episode covers the countdown to Laracon US, some meetup tips, and lots of other great stuff to check out on laravelpodcast.com. Up next, we have Lara Jobs. So if you are somebody that's a company that's looking to hire to post a job, and really just if you have any Laravel job needs, you can check them out at larajobs.com. A lot of great resources there. And we also have Laracast. So anyone that's looking to build their skills, big thank you to Jeffrey Way for running this awesome resource for anyone looking to build their skills, especially in Laravel. They have a platform to learn with others in the Laravel community. And I got the email this morning from Jeffrey about Matt Stauffer's new series about building a SaaS from scratch. So if you want to check that out, please go to laracast.com. Next, we have Laravel Live Denmark. So this is going to be happening later this week. You can still get some tickets. It's going to be the first Laravel conference held in the Nordic countries, so one you don't want to miss. And as for Laracon US, so this is happening next week. So we will be there. We'll be happy to see everybody, but the tickets are sold out. It's a sold out event. So really excited to see everyone in Dallas next week. And we'll catch you there.
It's going to be very hot. It was 40 degrees Celsius for those that keep track of Celsius degrees. It's going to be quite warm preparing for it.
Yeah, definitely. And then the beautiful land of Italy, they're going to be having a Laravel Day. So for all of my Italian Laravel friends, you can go check them out in person on November 7th. But it's also online as well, and tickets are still available. So you can check them out at laravelday.it. And Laracon AU is coming up. So there's 17 speakers from across Australia and around the world that'll be here at this event. Early bird tickets are on sale, so you can check them out at laracon.au. This will be happening at the beginning of November in Brisbane, Australia. As for some local meetups that you can go to online, sorry, not local, global, you can join this one online, but it's the GTA PHP user group. It's a dedicated group of PHP developers from Canada. They're excited to share their knowledge about PHP and other things that are going on, especially Laravel-related content. So you can check them up on meetup.com. And as for our host, thank you so much, Vehicle, for being able to relaunch this amazing meetup. And so just want to give a shout out to them. If you have any questions about development, they have a really great team of developers that can help you out. So make sure to hit them up at vehicle.com, or you can email them at go@vehicle.com. And once again, we have a giveaway. So thanks to our sponsor, JetBrains. If you scan that QR code, you'll be entered into our draw, which we will announce later this month. Later next month. We'll be contacting the winner. Again, watch out for an email from Lee, our community manager, and she'll get your prize to you.
And once again, we'll have the QR code at the end of the stream as well. Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. And that gets us into our two talks today. So up first, we have we see on the right there a man that's been in the Laravel community for a number of years. You may have got to know him online by his alter ego, Ninja or Ninja Parade. Longtime Laravel community member, principal developer at Ninja Parade Digital. And I happen to know that Yaz spent a lot of time, working both in Laravel and in the front end, I think both in Vue and React. And he's here. I'm really excited about the topic today. He's going to share how we can take some of our types from our back end and share them with our front end without duplicating our efforts. And it's going to bring more kind of stability to our code base. So let's bring him in here. How's it going today, Yaz?
Hey, I'm doing really well. How are you guys doing?
Awesome. Like I said, really excited for the topic of your talk. I think.
Thank you.
I was saying to you a week or two ago, we were chatting about this a little bit. Personally, in terms of the front end, I managed to, for most of my career, sort of avoid getting deep into TypeScript to any level. I worked on projects where TypeScript was on the project, but I just kind of like skirted around it and made the compiler happy. But definitely the last while, I've been leaning into more types on the front end. So really excited to see some of your approaches and your experience with how you can take some of your types that define the back end and then share them with your front end. So
yeah, I mean, I've definitely had the similar experiences where you can go overboard with types where it gets a little bit in the way rather than helpful. So but yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I was in the same boat a while back.
Awesome. Cool. So if you want to go ahead and share your screen there,
let me
get your slides or whatever up, and then Margaret and I will duck out backstage, and it's all yours. Looking forward to it.
Good luck.
All right. Okay, let me see if I get my.
There we go. I think I see it now. Okay. Perfect. All right. Without further ado, I will give it to you, and we'll just be backstage if you need anything, and we'll chat shortly.
All right. Sounds good.
Bye bye.
Okay. So yeah, I thought I'd first start off with introducing myself. So if you give me an opportunity to allow me to reintroduce myself to you here. My name is Yaz Jallad, and as you mentioned, I go by Ninja Parade on all social media, GitHub, Twitter, everything. It has been a long time using this username, and it all started from an Onion video. If you look up the Onion video for the Modesto County Ninja Parade, it's where the name comes from, and it's a pretty funny video. If you want to check it out. So yeah, I have been working with Laravel for a very long time. I've been in it since 4.1. I have been in that time consulting on my own little kind of company. In the process of that, I basically have been working as a full-time contractor. So basically a job for companies in the United States. A couple of them were VC-backed startups. And I've also taken on clients myself through this company and brought on developers and built teams to help build applications. I've worked on a ton of Inertia applications. I got to see Inertia when Jonathan Rennick was building it. I was working with him at the time. I was like the second or third person to see it. And so I've been involved in Inertia since the beginning. And during that time, I've worked with a lot of different teams on applications and in different stacks. And one of the things that I'm also going to be doing, I'm going to be looking for a new role or client starting in September. So if you're interested, I am going to be looking in a few weeks. And I'm going to be the Laracon photographer again for the conference. So I will be there running around with my camera. So during my time building all these applications and working with these different companies and teams, I basically have come away from this belief that there is no really wrong way to build an application. Every team is different, comprised of different people, different skill sets, different likes and opinions. So to have someone advocate one way or another to build an application, for me, I think is kind of doing the people an injustice. I think everyone should get the opportunity to try and play with all the technologies and see what they like and what feels right. The only time I think you're wrong is if you're not using Laravel. Laravel is definitely something you should be using. And I'm going to give you some actionable steps to avoid making big mistakes in your application, what I think are big mistakes. So the first mistake I want you not to make is use Laravel. I really think you should use Laravel. I also think that you should be using Inertia.js. Most importantly, I think you should hire me, because if you do, you'll end up using Sentry and you'll get acquired by $1 billion company. So I'm not kidding. This actually happened. More than on that later. So my talk is called What the Type, and it is generally vague. It used to be named something else, but I made it a little bit more vague just to allow myself to have a little bit more flexibility in what I want to talk about. But I did want to focus in on who this talk is for, to try and help shape the way that I want to present this and who this is going to be talking to. And for me, this is for anybody that wants to improve their developer experience. Now, definition of developer experience varies depending on who you're speaking with. But for me, this tweet that Sam Selikoff sent out just last week, talking about TypeScript and inline features in your editor, really hit home. And the part that I want to talk about here is you could be using a library or framework with the best designed API in the world, but you don't have any feedback while you're working, and you have to constantly switch from the docs to issues, and you feel like you're flying blind. And that, to me, is the epitome of what developer experience is. As someone who has ADHD, when my brain's just all over the place, I speak a mile a minute, my brain goes even faster. Having feedback in my IDE about things that are available to me for autocompletes and variables and values really, really helps me become even more productive. This is also for anyone that works in the front end or is a full stack developer. I think there's some stuff in here for you. And honestly, there's even some stuff in here if you're even just on the back end and working on the API, especially if you have an API that's being used by a JS client. And also this for people that want an efficient way to maintain a single source of truth. So Inertia.js prides itself by saying it's the elegant monolith, or the modern monolith. And what that is basically having all of your code in one place. And in Inertia's case, all of the business logic lives in the back end, whether you're sending data to the back end or to the front end. Inertia's handling all that through the back end. And Inertia provides a UI shell basically on the front end, which can be used with React, Vue, or Svelte. And then primarily, another good one is for anyone that wants to start using TypeScript, because TypeScript isn't an all or nothing situation. You can basically use a little bit of it here and there, and it really, really can add a lot of value to your app. And Inertia is the same way. So one of the jobs that I had in the past, I joined the team and they didn't really have Inertia in the application at all. It was Livewire and classically server rendered Blade views. And we introduced Inertia in the application and we started using it from there. So one of the things that I like about Inertia is that it is a middleware. Your app that you have right now, if you're not using Inertia, you can just drop Inertia in your routes, wrap a couple of routes that you want to be using Inertia in, and you can start from there. And that's what we did at one of my jobs. So we introduced it and we started using it, and they became a lot more productive. So I've mentioned Inertia quite a few times. So I'm hoping that you've heard of it. And if you haven't, I think it's a really good time to start listening in again, because Taylor sent out a tweet talking about it, and I got a firsthand look at some of the things coming to Inertia.js. So I'm going to go through here and talk about them. Kidding, I can't actually do that, and I know that's really, really unprofessional of me to make jokes in a professional setting like this. But you're going to have to wait for Laracon US next week. The good news is that Taylor is going to be live streaming his keynote on YouTube. So if you don't have the ability to be there in person at the sold out event, you will still have the ability to watch it live with everybody else and see what's going on. So now I alluded to the jobs that I worked at. So one of the jobs that I had, Ario, I joined them as their first full-time developer. At the time, they had they were working with a lot of contractors, building their MVP, and they already are making thousands and thousands of dollars a month in MMR. And when I joined them, I was planning on just working with them in the stack that they had. But some of the features that they were talking about really sounded like Inertia would be a good fit. So I showed them a proof of concept of it, and none of the founders, all of them were technical. None of them had been very comfortable with Vue or really knew much about Inertia. So I basically helped show them what that looked like, and we ended up adopting it, and the rest is history. Another company I didn't work for is Lemon Squeezy. You may know them. They're a huge Inertia application as well, big in the Laravel community. And the one thing that these two companies have in common is that they both got acquired by billion-dollar companies. Ario got acquired by Zillow. So yes, hire me at Inertia, get acquired. And Lemon Squeezy got acquired by this little known company called Stripe. So yeah, I told you, I wasn't kidding. It actually did happen. And Inertia and Laravel are not going to be the reason why your application doesn't get bought by a VC company and get acquired and give you $1 million exit. So you can use it safely. Also, you should remember to use Sentry. So how are we going to discuss what we're going to do today? How are we going to discuss the topics that I was talking about today and what we're going to do with it and how we're going to end up showing this? And it's simple. We're going to be using some packages from Spati, 3 of them in particular. One of them is called Laravel Data, which I'm hoping that I can convince you to use and you will fall in love with the way I have. Another one is a package called TypeScript Transformer, which works with Laravel Data, which transforms your types to TypeScript. And then a package called Spati Enums, which works with the TypeScript Transformer. And all of them are from our friends at Spati. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a very vanilla Laravel Breeze application. I've included a bunch of stuff in there just so that I don't have to have you watch me compose or install things. But basically, it's just a Breeze Vue TypeScript starter. And we're going to discuss the data that's being sent to and from the application and how we can improve things. And we're going to make these improvements small steps at a time to show you that you don't have to just go full bore, that you can start implementing things and kind of work your way up. And then we'll show you how these packages will make your life better. And in the process, hopefully a bunch of you will end up sending some postcards to Belgium. Okay, so let's get to the good stuff here. I am going to switch to my editor, and I am going to exit out from here. Okay. So yeah, like I said, this is just a basic Breeze starter, and you can see it here. This is going to be the finished application. So I'm just going to log in here with my user, Tyler Otwell, and I'm going to log in. So the only things that have really changed here is that I've created a little avatar and a username here, but you can see that this is just your basic Breeze starter, and I've added addresses here. And if I can add an address, you'll see here I'll get some validation errors. I'm not using form requests for this or validating the request with the request validation methods. So that's going to be something I'm going to show you. And I'm going to be able to add them, and I'm going to be able to edit them as well and update them and do everything I need to do here. So this is the application that we'll be starting with. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to like migrate fresh and seed. And I'm going to log in, and I'm going to show you that this is basically the exact same application with nothing in it. Okay, so you can see Tyler Otwell up there, dashboard. There's really nothing else. The profiles and everything work. So one of the first things I want to do is I want to show you some of the code that's in here and ready. So this is what comes with your inertia application once you start and install Breeze. So in the index.d.ts, which is basically just a definition for TypeScript, that's where the D comes from. It basically tells us this is what the user interface looks like. So basically this is a definition of the user in JavaScript that's going to be passed in from the back end. And the way that it's used in Laravel Breeze is that it defines the page props that it's going to be getting. And it tells us that inside of that page props, there's going to be an auth key with a user key in it. And that user is going to be defined by the user object up here. And where that comes from is from the inertia middleware. So you can see right here, this is the data that it's going to be returning. And this is one of the 3 ways that you can return data from the back end to your front end in inertia. In this case, it's basically returning the entire model. So anything on that user record in the database, excluding anything in the hidden array, will be returned to the front end. So if we go back to the index here, you can see that your model is going to have a created at and updated at timestamp, which are not going to be included here. And also you can see here that this is validated at, this is actually a nullable value, but we'll discuss that a little bit later. So for me, when I create a new application, the first thing I want to do is I actually change the user model right away. And I go from name to first name and last name. Okay. And when I do that, I'm just going to change my database seeder here so that it's actually going to be using the proper code to create the user. So I'm going to be using name and first name and last name. And I'm going to also update my factory, which is going to also be using first name and last name instead of just name. So I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to add this in. Okay. So now if I migrate fresh and seed again, you'll see that I have the exact same thing. But now immediately when I log in, I am going to be faced with my first problem. One of them is that I can't type. You'll see immediately that I've lost the value up here for my user. And the reason for that is because if we go to the authenticated layout, you'll see here that in the layout, basically what it's asking for is auth.user.name. And now we don't have name. So one way you can fix this is by adding an attribute. All right, so we can come down here, we can add an attribute. And what's nice about this attribute is that we can define the attribute based on the first name and last name and just adding them together. So now we refresh this, we still don't get what we want up there, but what we can do now is we can actually use Laravel's append method and append name to the model every single time that this is requested. So now anytime I ask for a user, it's going to give me everything that's in the values of the model, which is all the records, all the columns in the database. Plus, it's going to add the name value to it. So now we refresh this, you can see that now I'm getting it back. But the funny thing is that if I change my user definition here in my index in my index.d.ts. I could change it to this and remove this because whatever, you'll still see that I'm not going to get any errors or issues. But one of the things here is that you basically, I'm just showing you that you can actually have your type definition basically just deviate from what your actual model is really, really quickly. And for me, on the user model, I don't really think that this is the best way to do this. And I don't think that I want to do this. I want to use something else. So what I used to use was a Laravel resource. So I'm going to go to my inertia request here. And instead of returning the user just as is, I am going to return a user resource. And I'm going to make it from the request user. So now what this user resource does is it gives me the name value here, right? And I can also add first name and last name. Okay, so now if I run this and I return it, now you can see that I'm once again losing my user up here. And the reason for that is because if we go to our authenticated layout, and I'm just going to go down here to the slot so I can show you this, and I'm going to wrap this in a pre-tag so it formats the code for me. If I dump out global page.props.auth.user, you'll see the first problem here is that Laravel resources will always wrap the data that you provided in a data key. And the reason for this is that Laravel resources wants to maintain the structure of this response, whether or not you're passing in a single model or a paginated collection, because if you have passed in a paginated collection, you're going to have a meta key in here with all the information about the next records and the URLs for them, and etc. So for me, that's where I stopped wanting to use resources, because I think that it really is kind of frustrating to have to always access things through the key of data. So instead of doing this, what we're going to use is a user data. User. Let's make sure it's there. Yeah. Okay. User data. And instead of from, use make. And we're going to pass in the request user. No, it's not make. Sorry, it's from. Backwards. Okay. So now what the user data is going to do is it's going to be a definition of a class that basically has a constructor. And in here, what Laravel data wants is it wants every single key that you want to provide in your DTO to be strictly typed. And the reason for that is because it wants to be able to define everything that you're going to be using, which is going to be used by the TypeScript transformer. So you can see here, I have first name, last name, I have email, I have avatar, which I'm going to delete this for now because we're going to come back to it. And it's going to be doing it by using this magic method from model, and it's going to be returning the values here. And the reason why we're doing that is because, again, name is something that we need to ask for rather than appending. So I'm using this from model rather than just expecting the construct. If I added the name key back to that appends array, then I wouldn't have to do this down here. But because I'm not appending it, I'm basically specifically asking for it. So now what this looks like when I return it is that you're going to see we're going to have our information back here, and Laravel data is not going to be wrapping our user data inside of data. So the nice thing about Laravel data and Laravel resource is that they're amazing for returning from a JSON response. So if I go back to my web app here, my web routes, and this is where the dashboard is being rendered, and I'm just going to return user data from auth user. Okay, so now this is going to be our JSON response, and you can see it's back here. But if I want to wrap this in data, I can. In fact, you can wrap it in whatever you want. Right? It doesn't matter. But so you can maintain the same use case as you can for a Laravel resource, but now you can actually use Laravel data. So you basically have a on par usability there. Okay, so now we're going to go back here and we're going to start using something else in our front end to make things easier. So for me, this is gross. Going into a super global for page and going to props auth.user, I don't really want to do that. What I want to do is I want to introduce my first hook. So what a hook is kind of like, think of it as a little JavaScript method that you can run that will return back some data for you, that you can basically figure out all the data the way that you want to kind of manipulate the data and then have it sent back to you in your code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to declare a const of user, and it's going to be equal to use auth user. So now what this is here, if I go to auth user, it's basically just going to return my user for me. So it's going to access the page props, and it's going to deconstruct the auth key out of there, and it's going to return back the user as unknown as user. And the reason for that is because in our index.t.ts, you're seeing here that it's a record, that it's got a string, and it could be unknown. So basically what we're doing here is we're returning it that way. Okay, so now in here, we are exporting the user type from the types, which is declared there, and we're going to return that back. So now if I do this and I go back to my inertia authenticated layout, and I scroll back down here and I just dump out user, you'll see that I get the exact same thing. Okay, so that means we can go through here and we can get rid of all of this stuff and just get back to user. And you can see that it doesn't know what name is here for some reason, but we're going to fix that. And you can see everything is working here. So now the next thing I want to do is I want to add a little drop down for my user with an avatar. So we're going to go back to our authenticated layout here, and inside of the settings part here in the span tag right there, we're going to return this. Okay. So right now I'm still using the user props, but again, I can get rid of all of this and I can go back down to user. So now I'm going to get this little thing here, and really doesn't know what an avatar is. So I'm going to go to my user model again, and I'm going to add another little attribute, which I use in all my applications, and it's going to be for avatar. All right. And it's going to be getting this .name. So what this is going to do is it's going to return us a string that's going to be generating a UI avatar based on the user's name. And it's going to provide us with basically an image that we can show. And you can see here it's not working. So, but if I go to my user data and I comment this back in, you'll see now that I have the data here. So now one thing I want to show here is that I'm getting all these squiggly lines here, and it's kind of frustrating. So one way I can fix this is that in my composer.json file, I have installed the Laravel IDE helper. And I also have this little string, little composer function here, script, that allows me to generate all the little type hints and everything else that I need for my IDE to understand what my code is. And what's amazing about this is that it generates the stuff for the models. So this command right here will actually go into your models, go into your migrations, go into your database, figure out all the values that are in there, and generate all these values for you. So now if I go to Composer, IDE helper, and run that, you'll see that once Laravel PHP Storm is indexed, all these values are now going to be provided to me and give me autocompletes. So now rather than having to figure out what is available, I get autocompletes now for everything in my user model. And when I click through to it, you can see that this is generated code that now is from here, is providing me all that stuff. Not only that, these two read-only mixins are my attributes. So it actually even knows how to pick that up as well. Okay, so now if we run that, we can see we're back to here. All right, that's fantastic. So now that's one of the use cases for Laravel data. But the one that I really want to show you now, if I go to my TypeScript transformer here, so I have the TypeScript transformer package already installed. And what this package does by default when you publish out the config file for it is it allows you to define where your DTOs are that you want to transform to TypeScript. So you may not want to define all of it. You may want to have a subset of stuff that you're providing for your front end, so you can do that. But in my use case here, it's just going to go look in app, and it's going to look for anything in here that it wants. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a little declaration at the top here, and it's going to be TypeScript. Now, what I'm going to do from there is I'm going to do PHP artisan TypeScript transform. And you can see here now that I've generated a TypeScript definition of my user data based on this DTO. And it's going to end up in resources, and it's going to end up in types. And there it is. So now if I look at this, this looks very similar to what we had before, except now it's namespaced with the namespace that's being used by your DTO. So what's amazing about this is that if I decide in my user data that I actually don't want to have my avatar here anymore, and I just get rid of it, and I run this again, you'll see that in my generated, it's no longer there. So you don't have to worry about maintaining your types for your front end anymore. It's going to follow whatever you're dictating from your back end, which gives you that single source of truth. So I'm going to add this back and here, and I'm going to generate this again. Okay, so now in my use auth hook, rather than this type being used, what I'm going to use is my app.data.userdata. Okay, so now when I go to my front end here, you'll see that everything's working again and everything's back to where I want it. So that's one use case for it. The next one is something that I've started to do, which I really enjoy, which is basically use it to create data. So I'm going to go to my authenticated layout here. I'm going to add another little link here, which is going to allow us to create the addresses. Okay, so now when I go to addresses here, and I need to add a relationship here for addresses. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you the addresses and base. Right, I need to migrate. Sorry. Address table. Where is it? There. Okay, so this is what our address table looks like. It's very simple. It has a foreign ID, which belongs to the user. It has a type, street, address, state, and postal code. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to refresh and see it again. And now I'm going to log back in one more time. And you can see one of the errors that I'm getting here. So basically now, the reason for this is that in my inertia middleware, I have defined it as a user is always available. So what's nice about this is that you can just say this is optional and say that it's going to be available sometimes, and then that goes away. So another amazing feature for Laravel data. So now when I log in here and password, I'm back to the exact same thing. And now I have an addresses area here where I could create an address. Now, like I said before, I'm not using a form request or using the request validate method here at all. I'm actually using Laravel data. So if I go to the store method here, you can see that I'm using this thing called address update or create data, which is defined here by what the values are for my payload that I want to create an address for a user. So now when I go to the create function, the create controller, you can see what I'm doing is I'm creating a new address model, which is this model here, which has these values. And what I'm using is something that Colin DiCarlo has talked about in the past, which is I'm defining the attribute defaults for my table to be of type, and there's an enum of primary, which could be primary, home, or office. I'm setting the country to Canada, and I'm setting the state to British Columbia because that's where I am. And I'm also casting this type to an address type and setting the relationship to the user. So now when I create this new model and I set this user ID, I can pass this to my create function. And what it's going to happen is going to basically give me a starting point for my address form. So here you can see I have the address object here, and I have a little handler here that handles the submission of the form. And I'm using it by submitting it to the, I'm passing the prop of address to the address form. And in that form, it has the exact same definition here. And it's able to, I have all my enums defined here, and this is the table. Now, one of the things I want you to show here is that the type here is not defined. This doesn't know what's going on here, doesn't know what this address is. And one way I can fix this is if I actually explicitly define each value here for type, it will understand what's going on. But I got something up my sleeve that's a little bit better. So I'm going to go to my update or create address, update and create form. And I am going to add TypeScript to this. And then I'm going to generate this again. So now you can see I have one DTO definition that is in forms. So now if I go to my create controller here, and all I need to do now is update, passing in the model directly to update address, update or create data from address. So now when I do that and I go to my create, I can change my prop definition from this to app.data.forms.update or create data. Okay. So now when I pass that in here, that's what I'm going to get. So if I go to my form here and I just add that little pre-tag again, you'll see that I get a starting point for my payload that I want to use in my form. And the nice thing about this is that Vue will not have a reactive form unless all the keys that you want to be reactive exist. So in the previous method, I would only get the values for my default attributes and the user ID that I set. But with this, I get to have all the keys there, even though they're going to be null. So now what we can do from here is that we can switch from this being of a use form with just an object that doesn't know what it is. And we can define this as well to app.data.forms.address or update data. And now you're going to see the magic that's going to happen immediately. Now, for whatever reason, now it knows all the values that are in your form, which is fantastic. But you can go one step further. You can even tell Inertia that this is of this type of data. And it's going to know what's going on. So now you can define your form as that type. So now what's nice about this is that if you did not type this as well, you can go back to object. Now it's going to complain. Or it should. I don't know why it's not. But anyways, so we have that. So now we have that create record here. Okay. So now when I create the record, you can see that I'm getting this validation here. And the reason for that is because in my address update or create data, I actually have the ability to define the validation. So that's another +1 for Laravel data. Now, not only can I define the payload that I want the form to send to the backend, I can also in here define the structure of the data that I want to validate when it goes into the form. And the amazing thing here is in that store method, I can literally just take the data to array. So I'm not going to get any keys or anything like that that is being maliciously passed in. And I can use fillable and I can use this together. And I'm not going to be submitting any data into my database that I have not already defined, which is amazing, which works similar to request validated if you've used a form object. Okay, so now that's one thing there. So I'm running really long here, so I'm going to stop there. I think there's a lot more I can do here, but I just want to show you one little quick thing here that I want to be able to do. So the type that's being generated here is going to the wrong place. So in my TypeScript transformer here, I'm going to show you that I can actually define where this goes. So everything that I have right now is going into JS types, and you can change this to PHP types. And I'm going to delete this. And I'm going to run my types again. And you're going to see now that your types are going to go in the right place. So I want to look at the types one more time. So you can see here that we actually have a type with an enum, which is not being respected here. And the reason for that is I've turned off the collection for the enum collector. So now if I do this and I run this again, you're going to see something awesome. I'm going to get my enum address type also generated. So now this also gives me the definition of what the options for the address types can be. So if I go back to my form, you can see here the types are going to be, where are we? Address types. You can see here that if I hover over this, should give me value, which of course, now that I'm doing this live, it's going to not do it. But there you are. No, it's not doing it. Anyways, normally it will give you the values of the options in your DTOs. Okay, so that's definitely, I got to stop there. There's a ton more that we can go back to. So there's so much more that we can go to. So one other thing that I use Laravel data for is for creating a cast. So imagine you have a JSON column on your database and you want to define what that type looks like. And when you create this, you have a bunch of loose keys. You don't really know what they are. So when you pass that JSON to your front end, you really don't know what you're getting. So what I do in my application, which is the application I'm building right now, that's going to be used to share all the photos that I take next week at Laracon. This is actually one of the real code implementations. I basically have a cast that I use to go from an array that's coming from the JSON that's in the database and back to JSON from the Laravel DTO. So this is what the DTO looks like. And basically I have all these default values set up. So now when I actually generate the types for this, not only do I get the structure of the DTO, but I also get the structure of the JSON columns as well. The other thing you can do is in your tests, you can actually create a test where you can pass in your options as an array. And then in your cert, when you're making sure that your data that you created from that is in there, you can actually make sure that your options to JSON also match, which is an amazing thing. Another thing we can do in our project to help is we can use ESLint, which helps linting, obviously catches errors in your code before it gets out there. There's a plugin for ESLint to use your classes in Tailwind to sort them in format. And it also allows you to add some style rules for your team. And that's it. That's all I got. I got to stop. Otherwise, I'm going to keep going. But hopefully I've talked a mile a minute.
Oh, that was amazing. I mean, that's definitely it's obviously a topic, especially you're dealing with the full stack, even in just TypeScript alone. You could give 5 talks on the topic, right, and going into specific things. And I think
for sure
we were chatting before, and I think the biggest thing for a lot of people, there's maybe some people that aren't using types at all. They're using types a little bit. Like I spoke to, like it was my past experience, and I think you definitely give us the tools there to like get started. How can I start digging into some of this stuff? So that was awesome. I had an initial question, Yaz. I'm just trying to like conceptualize how these things play together, because you mentioned the Laravel data package from Spotty. Then you also mentioned the TypeScript transformer, which is a different package.
Yes.
And I'm kind of thinking it from the standpoint of like, if I wanted to start introducing some typing, especially in the front end to a legacy project that didn't have any of this stuff set up, do I have to use the Laravel data package in order to use the TypeScript transformer, or am I best to use them together? Or?
Yeah, they work hand in hand. Basically what it does is it takes those strictly typed DTOs and transform them into types for the front end. So you need both of them together to work. Yeah. And if you want the enums, that's an optional thing, but you can add the enums as well. Enums in TypeScript and JavaScript are nice to have, but they don't really have the full power that we have in PHP and other languages. But it is nice, because I don't know why my IDE decided to do that, but normally it does give you the autocompletes and shows you what options there are again in there. So for discoverability, it's great. Yeah. But yeah, you definitely need to use both of them together. Otherwise, it's not going to be as beneficial for sure.
Okay, so yeah, I would probably want to, because like the Laravel data package, TypeScript aside, it's largely used for defining the structure of my data that would be either coming into or leaving my application, right?
Yeah, exactly. So from your front end, from your back end to your front end would be a good one to define that. From your front end to your back end, and like a request. It's able to go from an array, from a model, from anything that you would use in a package in your application. Sorry. So even if you're just using that as a way of passing data in between your application internally, it's a really good package. And then as well, if you define those types, you get the TypeScript definitions out of them, but you're also able to return them as resources. So it has all the same things that Laravel Resources has, where you can optionally lazy load relationships if they exist, and on and on and on, and whether or not a user should see it or not, if they're those conditions. So there's a ton of stuff that you can go in there. It is an amazing package. If you use it a little bit, use it a lot, it's up to you. I started out just using it for the TypeScript stuff, and I've gone kind of full bore. So it's definitely kind of like TypeScript, like Inertia. It's not an all or anything, all or everything. You can use it piece by piece and add it as you want to
on certain requests. Yeah. Looking even just at the top level of the documentation, it seems like it, among other things, combines like things you do in a form request and things you do in like an API transformer, like a resource, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think, definitely. When I think about it, there's some duplication in my code sometimes there, where I'm defining the structure in my resource, but I'm also defining validation rules that rely on it. And the classic thing, you go to add, you give a couple good examples there. I want to add this field to this model. You end up having to update it in multiple places. Yeah. So it seems like a nice place to kind of centralize all of that stuff. Awesome.
Yeah.
This brings me to like just a general question I had too about, and thinking about from working for a consultancy, and we do lots of work on existing applications. And I feel like types is one of those things like testing, where it's probably so much easier if you can put that structure in place at the start, a lot more challenging to do it after the fact.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we come into a lot of code bases that don't have tests or don't have types already.
Mhm.
Do you have any general advice if you came into it, maybe even an inertial app already, but there's little typing on front and back end? Where would you get started? How would you start kind of getting to the spot of like having a structure like you demonstrated there?
So, I mean, with Ario as an example, we started out with like kind of like a low hanging area, was because we didn't have a lot of complexity, right? I think the first thing that we did in Inertia at Ario was the user settings, and basically just started with that because user settings were so simple compared to the rest of the application. So I would just find somewhere that's simple, that's easy, that doesn't have like an overly confusing component layer, view layer, or anything like that, where by just defining some of the types that you are able to do in that simple section and start working on those piece by piece, and then kind of moving forward, you're able to do that. And I think Titan's actually talked about this as well, where they've kind of like slowly introduced Laravel into a legacy app that didn't use Laravel, and just, slowly piece by piece bringing stuff in from the old code base to the new code base. And that's the best way to do it, unless basically you want to do full app rewrite, which I don't think a lot of companies want to do, and I don't think it's really a good idea for most companies to do.
Yeah, no, totally.
But yeah, you definitely get a lot of bang for your buck, and those types can be actually generated into PHP spec. Sorry, not PHP, Open API specs, because the structure of your DTO to TypeScript is the same thing as what you would have in your open spec for a model resource that you're returning back. So there's a lot of things that you can do with that it's just so beneficial if you add it to your app.
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
cool. One question I have, just to tag onto that really quickly, I'm just curious your opinion, Yaz, on your experience with that. And I'm sure it varies on the complexity of the project, but do you have like I don't know, any reference to time it would take, or like the power in order to do something like that, to rewrite something?
I mean, if you have a Laravel resource already, it's not a lot of time at all, especially because you have all the logic in there of what data you want to be kind of like ear loading and whatever, and you have the shape of the data that you want to be returning. So it doesn't really take a ton of time. Adding these classes doesn't take a ton of time. If you're using form requests, you can just grab those rules. The Laravel data also has like an authorization layer, which basically can be used the same way. And then on top of that, it also has like a pipeline, which you can pass when you're passing the data in. It does a bunch of stuff by default, but you can also create a pipeline of other things you want to do, because I know there's some applications that have like a pre-validate kind of like step that they want to take that data and shape it to something else before they validate it, and that kind of stuff. So you can do all that stuff with this. So you can start super easily. Like if you're using all the stock Laravel stuff right now with form requests and resources, going to a Laravel data paradigm isn't a ton of work. It's basically just kind of copying and pasting and moving things around in that case.
Okay, awesome.
So I don't think it's a ton of work personally, but it depends on the application. I think it could be completely like more work than that.
Awesome.
No, I do like that takeaway. Like you said, like doing a full rewrite is often not the way you want to go, despite what maybe Caleb Porzio advice he gave us back in January. But I totally agree. I think working for a client, you always want to be thinking about what's the most value what value can I start delivering right away.
Exactly.
And I think the fact that you can kind of do these things incrementally is a really nice benefit. You can start seeing some wins right away. So.
Oh yeah. For sure.
Yeah. I had one more question in my mind. When you like, one of the nice things, especially when you're working in teams, is if you can generate your types, it's going to make it more likely that those types get maintained, right? When you have to bounce around and add a thing here on the front end and then go to the back end and do the same, or vice versa, it's a lot less likely, especially within a team, let alone working on by yourself, a lot less likely that gets maintained. But you still need to, there was that step there where you ran, I think, like an artisan command or something to generate the types.
Yeah.
Do you have any general advice for how can I avoid adding something new on the back end and forgetting to regenerate that type on the front end?
So yeah, so that's something I wanted to add to this talk as well. So there's a bunch of Vite plugins. One of them is called I think it's a Laravel Vite Watch or Vite Run plugin. And basically what you're able to do is on the Vite config, you're able to say, watch this directory. And then whenever something changes, run this command. And you can pass in, PHP artisan TypeScript transform, so that it'll always do it for you every time you want. And it also, you can do that as well for like if you're using Ziggy, you can watch your routes so that it generates the routes again for you, because sometimes it doesn't do that.
Okay.
But yeah, like there's a lot of stuff that you can do there. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I think that this talk has kind of made me realize just how deep you can go into this, and kind of like adding these like little baby steps incrementally to kind of like supercharge your experience. So I think that I definitely want to follow up with kind of like more information about that, just kind of like, what our apps look like. Like we have like a starter app that I use, in React that like basically is very similar. And the beauty thing about TypeScript is that it doesn't matter what language you're using, what framework, even though you could be wrong in using Vue. But yeah, you can use it. You can use it there. That one's for Jason Beggs. But yeah, so definitely like make things so you can kind of automate them in the back end, so that you don't have to watch these things and keep reminding yourself to run them.
Yeah, I was wondering too, like especially in a team environment, is there anything that can be done in like CI or something to alert to like there's a discrepancy here between our front and back end type?
Yeah. So for me, I look at Laravel data's type transformers. I don't look at them. I look at them like my front end assets. I don't compile them and commit them to the code.
Okay. It's just part of your build step.
Yeah, because you're gonna end up with a ton of conflicts otherwise, and that should be something fresh based on what's going on in the app. That
makes
right now.
sense. You're just generating them every time, so you eliminate the likelihood that there is a discrepancy between the two.
Yeah, exactly. And in the build step, normally that it's like with Vite, we basically run it from that. So when Vite runs, it would run those types for you as well.
Right.
So we don't have to really think about it when it's set up properly.
And I think that's the key, whether you're a solo developer or especially with a team. Just you don't have to think about it; it just happens. That's the best. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. All right.
Well, thank you so much for having me, guys. I feel like I've been on a production of CBC Canada here.
Yeah, it's a all Canadian production today.
Worldwide, but only in Canada.
And also, very much looking forward to catching up with you at Laracon.
See you all
next week and snapping lots of great picks. So thanks again, Yaz, for joining. And
thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
We'll talk to you soon. All right.
See you guys.
Cool.
See ya.
All right, that was awesome. Like we said,
Very great.
There's a ton of more data or a ton of more info that Yaz could dig into there. So maybe we'll have to have him back for another talk. Maybe he'll be speaking at a conference or user group near you soon on some of this stuff. But yeah, there's a ton there. I think that's really valuable to everyday work. So awesome, cool. So moving on to our second awesome talk of the month, we have Drishti Jain joining us. Drishti is we were chatting with her just yesterday. Actually, sounds like she's in the midst of making a round of conference talks and doing a bunch of talks at conferences. The vehicle crew, including my co-host Margaret, met with Drishti at PHP Tech back in Chicago in the spring, where she gave a couple of talks. We also learned that she's a author of a recent newly released book called Ultimate Laravel. If you want to check that out, it's available on Amazon. And Drishti is here today to share with us some insight into one of the many great features within Laravel, the Eloquent ORM, and I think how we can kind of lean into the Eloquent ORM and make our queries, no pun intended, more eloquent at times. So let's bring Drishti in here.
Welcome.
Oh, hi.
Hello, Drishti. How are you today?
I'm good.
Awesome.
Nice to be here. Thanks for the wonderful introduction and plugging in my book.
Absolutely. Of course. Check it out, now available on Amazon. Thank you once again for joining us today. And we were talking yesterday. I know you've been in the midst of a lot of travel recently, just recently got back home. So thank you for being here, and we're really looking forward to your talk. So if you want to go ahead, Drishti, and share your screen, we'll probably get started. And then is there anything else you need from us before you take it away here?
I think it should be good. Just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yep, we'll get your. All right, I think I see it there. I think I see some slides. Crafting Laravel Magic. There we go. Perfect. Yep. All right, Margaret and I will step backstage. If you need anything, just let us know. But take it away. Looking forward to it. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Drishti Jain, and today I'm going to be sharing a few of the important key points of Eloquent and how you can use the key features in order to make your queries to be much more efficient. More than diving into live code, I wanted to share all the tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, things that can help you make your Laravel applications to be much more robust, much more fast, and retrieve data in the best possible way. A quick summary about me. So I'm a software developer, also getting a lot into the machine learning space. The book you see here is the book it's there on Amazon. You can go grab a copy, either the physical version or the Kindle version. I'm also an international tech speaker. I frequently speak at conferences, sharing my learnings, new things that I'm building across the globe. If you scan the QR code, you'll have all the links, including the book or my social media. I'm also a social entrepreneur. I'm based out in the US right now, but back home in India, I have a nonprofit organization which works across environment, education, and healthcare. So that is something which is close to me, and the main aim of my organization is to empower underprivileged children with tech skills so that once they grow up, they will be pretty self-sufficient to take care of themselves and also make a good living. And I'm also a career coach. So my own initiative called Skill Up with Drishti helps developers early to mid careers in order to advance in their career. How do you stand out if you're looking at switching a job? How do you do that? Tips and tricks. So you can find my calendar link in the QR code as well. So let's get started. I know most of you must have used Eloquent ORM, but in case you have not, a quick summary. So it is Laravel's built-in ORM that simplifies database interactions, and it allows you to work with database records using an object-oriented approach. The key point of why we should use Eloquent queries or Eloquent ORM is that it eliminates the need of complex SQL queries, making it very easy for your code to be maintained, and also easy when you are transferring your current code to a new developer in your team. We all have been in places wherein we've worked on a new code database, and understanding queries which have been written becomes a tedious job, and you move one thing and it might just break the prod. So we don't want that to happen. Using Eloquent, you eliminate the complete need of having any complex SQL queries, which makes your code much more maintainable. And that way you can also build upon your current code and you do not have to rewrite your code again and again. So why is mastering Eloquent required? You might think it's just like everything related to databases, but our backend is the most important thing that we should be focusing on. But actually, if you master Eloquent and you're able to get that out of the way, do it in an efficient way, you would increase your productivity by reducing boilerplate code. Also, you'll receive a lot of rich features for managing relationships, for querying, or interacting with your database. Now, the same problem can be approached in multiple ways. One is the traditional way of you writing long queries, querying your database every time. But just take a step back and think about what would happen if you're always querying your database. And it's not just one request at a time. Your application overnight becomes a success, and you would have multiple requests that would go through your application. In that case, you need efficient queries so that users do not have to worry about the latency your application might producing due to database queries, and also a way in which if you have to build more code on the top of your current code, you should be able to do that. A couple of concepts before we dive into the advanced topics. So models. Models in Eloquent act as an abstract layer over any database tables, which represent the specific table and its data. Models allow you to define relationships and interact with the database very effortlessly. What this helps is you can think of model to be a way in which you're interacting with your actual data. And that way, if you have to expand upon your model, say you have to, in simple SQL terms, like if you have to join a table with another table, something new comes up in your business needs, then models can be easily modified and also create relationships that you can then interact with in your future code as well. So it helps kind of make your code to be very future proof. Also, migrations. Migrations are like the version control for your database. So whenever you have to define or modify the structure of your tables by code, you want to ensure that your schema remains constant and consistent across environments. So whenever you are working across multiple environments, you would want there to be some sort of a version control, because if you have some part of your application which is querying the previous form of your database, it should still work. And if your database has expanded, you have more values, more features added, it should still be able to do that. So migrations help in version controlling of your database. And factories and seeders. So factories help generate synthetic data for testing, and seeders populate your database with data, which helps you build a strong foundation for development and testing. Among all the good applications we create, a crucial part of making an application to be at that top-notch level wherein it can be productionized, it can be used by multiple users, is good testing. For testing, you may or may not always have good data on your hand. what do you do in case you do not have a lot of good data? You create synthetic data. So synthetic data can also be thought of as like fake or additional data that you create. And this data is related to your current schema. With this schema, you would want to create data which represents the properties of your data, but is also unique so that you are able to test out more. And having a way to generate that easily is what factories and seeders help you to do. Now, a key important concept with Eloquent is collections. So, Eloquent collections, whenever you are trying to retrieve multiple records from a database, Eloquent returns like a collection of models. And these collections are array-like structures with added functionality to manipulate the dataset more effectively. So there will be most of the cases require you to fetch multiple records from your database. And once you do that, as we saw the concept of model, you get a collection of models back, and it is in an array-like structure. So you can easily manipulate, you can add, delete, update, modify everything inside your database very, very easily. And collections help you do that. A few of the key methods. The very first one is pluck. So it extracts specific values from the collection. Laravel being very friendly, you would see that the key methods, the names of the methods are very easy to understand. Exactly the meaning that we have in English would be used. So pluck, if you want to extract, once you have a collection, you want to extract a particular value. You might have different conditions. Say if it is related to sales of cars, if your data is car sales data, in that case you would want to extract specific value related to a particular model or the make of a car or a type of a car. So you can easily use pluck to do that. The second one is map. It applies a function to each item on the collection. Whenever you have to map anything, you use the method map. The next is filter. So filtering items based on a given condition. I've seen a lot of applications, and also sometimes I do this when I'm developing applications as well, that you would want to give the user more flexibility in order to also interact with your application. And you would want to add filters in various locations. So for that, you would want to query your database in order to just fetch those specific records. So filter is very useful in that case. And the last key method is each. It iterates through each item in the collection in order to perform an action. So whenever it's like a for loop wherein you want to go to each of the elements and you want some logic to be applied to each of the elements, you use the key method of each. Now, these were the basic ones. If you have to create a custom collection, you can still extend Eloquent by defining custom methods which operate on your models. This gives you more control over data manipulation. Just sharing an interesting key project I worked on was for a startup which works in developing umbrellas. And when they wanted, so they realized during the data collection phase that it's not just during the rainy season that umbrella sales go up, but also during summer as well. When it's too hot, a lot of people buy umbrellas in order to like be safe from the sun. So you would want to have custom methods based on conditions. And if you're especially writing a function like I did in order to predict sales, you would want to also include things like this, which may or may not happen given a particular condition. So in that case, you would want to write your own custom collection, and you can extend your Eloquent collections by defining any kind of custom methods that you want in your model. And that way you're able to manipulate the data much, much better, get the results that you want. Eloquent relationships are key whenever you want to perform anything with respect to data in your database. So it makes it easy to define relationships between the different models, or if you're new to Eloquent, you can think of it as tables. So one-to-one relationship, a single record in one table relates to a single record into the other table. A classic example is like employee-employer case, wherein one employee would be mapped to a single record in the employer database, one-to-many. A single record in one table can relate to multiple records in other. So you can have house owners and people in a particular area. A single person can own multiple houses. So relationships like those would be represented by a one-to-many relationship. Many-to-many, multiple records in a table can relate to multiple records in another table. So whenever you have a case of multiple records being mapped to multiple records either way, many-to-many helps a lot. When you're developing your own custom tables, your own custom data, you would come across many-to-many. And polymorphic, a single model can belong to more than one other model in a single association. So this is very common. You will see polymorphic relationships to be there between your data set to be very, very frequent, and Eloquent can be used in order to handle these relationships as well. A key concept that comes when we're talking about Eloquent relationships is eager loading. Now, there are both pros and cons, but the pros outweigh if you know how to manage the cons of eager loading. So eager loading is a way in order to optimize queries by loading related models as a part of the initial query, which reduces the number of query executed. This is like a way in which, not exactly caching, but a way in which you would want to have your models to be loaded initially. So if you're using a lot of queries on those particular models, then you would want to query it fast. And if it is preloaded, it'll be easy for you to get the results very, very quickly. But don't just load everything from a model. If something is being used, say, once every 100 queries, then it doesn't make sense to have it as a part of eager loading. But if it is something that is used every 5 queries, 10 queries, then yes, eager loading is the way to go. And you can load your model pretty early in the stage and go ahead and use it. The next is mutators and accessors. So mutators allow you to alter data before it is saved to the database. So whenever you have a write option in your application, you want to modify or alter your data, mutators help you do that. And accessors allow you to modify data when it is retrieved from database. Now, these two are very, very different. One is when you're modifying data before it is added to your database. The other is when you're fetching the data from the database and then modifying data. That is wherein you would use accessors. Query scopes. So scopes allow you to encapsulate commonly used query constraints within a model method, which makes your code cleaner and reusable. If you see a common theme in my presentation and what I'm trying to communicate through this talk today is that Eloquent queries, your main goal should one be like efficient applications wherein you're fetching data pretty quickly, and the second one being writing cleaner, maintainable code and reusable code. That is what I use. That is the main goal I have whenever I'm using Eloquent queries in my Laravel applications. So query scopes allow you to encapsulate any query constraints which are commonly used within a model method. So try and use query scopes a lot. That way you will be able to add commonly used things in your model method, and that way once you're using it, you have that same functionality in every use that you go ahead and do. An important part is using the with and the with count. So the with method is used for eager loading related models, while the with count adds a related model count as an attribute of the parent model. So they might seem exactly the same when you first go through it, but they're pretty different. And the best way is whenever you want an eager loading related method, that is wherein you would use with. Just remember that. And in other cases, wherever you want to add a related model count as an attribute of your parent model, that is wherein you would use with count. Now let's come to the key part, which is optimizing performance. Just think about, while I go through the next slides, think about your current application and think about ways that you have thought, and did you even give a thought of optimizing your Eloquent ORM and queries in order to optimize performance? Or have you just been thinking about making your like the backend to be more optimized or better in performance? And now just think, while I'm going through the slides as to how you can incorporate this in your current applications. The first one is batch processing. Handle large data sets efficiently by processing them in chunks instead of loading them all at once. So many times you would feel that it is better if I have a large data set of just loading it because I'm going to query multiple parts of it together. But actually, it is much more efficient if you process them in chunks. Chunks help you also prioritize what sequence of queries your application might face. So there can be many cases wherein your application is querying the whole data set, but there will be chunks which will be queried more, there will be chunks which will be queried less. If you batch process while handling large data sets, this is very useful. I work in a lot of real-time data sets, and in that case, if I don't have a good batch processing setup, it becomes a tedious workload for me in order to process everything, handle everything, and it does not give me a very optimized application. I have to keep refactoring the code. So the best way to overcome this is using batch processing. Caching queries. So you can cache frequently run queries in order to reduce database load and improve application performance. Whenever you can, I would say you cache your frequently run queries because they will help you, one, retrieve results much more quicker, and second, if you know queries like if your application say has a particular number which has to be displayed. So that is a query to retrieve the number. That can be the count on the website if it is like an admin site of an application, or it could be say the number of users we are serving, any kind of like a real-time data, which is going to be a query which is going to be fetched every time a user loads up the application. Cache those queries. They're frequently run queries. Many times people ask me on this, how do you identify what is a more frequently run query and what is a less frequently run query? Because it's also not a good practice to just cache all of your queries, which may seem frequent but actually are not. My approach to this is any query which runs every time. So every time a user is on the page, you have some result which is as a result of a particular query. Cache all of those queries. And if there is something when a user interacts with, say, a button or a drop down or something like that, and then the query is run, you may or may not want to cache it based on how many queries are already cached. If you have like 2-3 queries cached, then you can include those. But if you already have 10 queries which are cached, then you may not want to include the ad hoc queries in your cache. Indexes and database optimization. So in order to also optimize your database, you can actually use proper indexes and use query optimization techniques as we have been discussing to speed up the data retrieval process. Indexing can help you quite a bit. Retrieving data from indexes is much faster, much quicker than matching it to a particular value and then retrieving that data. So add indexes based on your business requirements so that you are able to fetch records much more quickly. Now, with this comes testing with Eloquent. So there are, whenever you are working with Eloquent, a key factor is how do you test well with it? How do you make sure that everything works really, really smoothly or not? So the very first one is factory-based testing. So we learn about factories and seeders. So use factories to generate consistent and reliable test data, which allows you to simulate various scenarios. So whenever you're approaching testing through a factory-based approach, you're generating synthetic data, and factories help you do that. So try and also think of different edge case scenarios. If there are different user personas in your application, generate data for each of the user personas. It can be an end user, your admin, different scenarios that you have. You can use factories in order to generate that synthetic data. Also, you can, while approaching it through the factory-based testing, you also need to ensure that there is, it does not become a case wherein data of one kind is huge and data of the other kind is less. Your tests might go well, but when you put it to prod, and what if the data set that you have less of is the one which actually gets used more, and your application may or may not work as intended. So ensure that it simulates various scenarios and also a constant supply of data for each of it while testing. Um, Also, a lot of database transactions in tests. So you can encapsulate tests in transactions in order to ensure your database remains in a consistent state by rollback changes after each test. So encapsulating tests in transactions is a good way whenever you're testing and want to actually make the most of your executions. A few best practices and pitfalls. Avoid common mistakes. Beware of the n+1 query problem and unnecessary eager loading. Eager loading is a great way in order to load everything all in your first query and then work upon the results. But if you do unnecessary eager loading, you yourself, even the application might not be like not efficient, but you with eager loading might have made it to be like very less efficient. So don't do that. Also, the n+1 query problem, think about it whenever you're designing your queries and not just go ahead and write queries. A few best practices: use query scopes. Query scopes help you optimize very, very good. If a few things that I want you to take back from the talk today of how you can improve your current applications are these three things. First, use query scopes. If you don't already use it, go back to your application, read through the code and see where you can incorporate query scopes and do that. Define proper relationships. Many a times there might be deadlines in a realistic world. There are things you have to deliver even though they might not be the most optimal way of doing things. But once you get time to step back, just look at the relationships you have defined. Many a times the relationships form a loop which causes the slowness in your application more than the actual relationship that is there. So if you have like loops or unwanted duplication of relationships, remove that and define proper relationships. And optimize queries and database interactions for efficiencies. Make a call if caching is a good way for you, if adding the frequently used queries is a good way or not. Make that call for your particular use case. Uh, Moving on to serialization. So serialization with Eloquent is very, very powerful. You can, in simple words, serialization is like when your models and relationships have to be converted to arrays or JSON in order for you to work on it. A quick example of appending values to JSON. Laravel being very, very friendly for us to write, it is as easy as this. You can, if it is an admin part of the application, you can directly append values to your JSON on the go. And also, if you want to do it at runtime, then you can either use append or set appends in order to add values to your JSON. So anytime you're working with, say, real-time data and you have constant data, and or it is also, if it is not a case of real-time data, but constant updates to your application, say weekly you are fetching data, scraping data, and then adding it to your JSON, the results, then you can use append or set appends as well. Now that we've talked about the best practices, serialization, how should you handle Eloquent queries? One of the key points is how do you debug Eloquent queries? So common debugging techniques, you can go ahead and look at Laravel's built-in tools like the dump function, the log function, and the dd function to debug Eloquent queries. See if you are retrieving the same kind of results through your Eloquent queries, or are you actually doing something new with each of the queries. When you write multiple queries in an application which has been there for a few years, you might not want to just remove code which has been written. You would want to debug it well to see if the query you have in mind actually is already being used. If it is already being used, then why not reuse the query or modify that query instead of just writing a new one and just increasing your code base. So you can log out different queries, see the results, and then make a decision. Also, in order to optimize queries, you need to understand how to use query logs and other tools to improve performance. So query logs help you to get details of your query in a very efficient way. So whenever you have to optimize queries, try and log. That way you'll see if firstly it is a very complex query. If it is unwantedly being complex, are you just trying to go into a loop? You're fetching it from one of your model and then again fetching it from the second model and then again coming back to the first. So why not just fetch the two things you want in the first initially, so that you don't have to make this extra call to the first table of to the first model. So try and think of these things of how you can use logs, query logs, and identify relationships like this, which might actually be slowing down your application. And that's it from my end. Thank you so much. It was great sharing all of my best practices and learnings about Eloquent queries with everybody today.
Awesome. Thank you, Drishti.
Thank you.
Yeah, lots of information in there. I think for people that have been using Laravel for a while, and maybe some newcomers that are just kind of discovering the framework and some of the features within it. I had an initial question about Eloquent, and I think you touched on it a little bit. And I don't know how much experience you have working on client code, for other people and companies. But is there anything that stands out to you of like that you see commonly where maybe someone's using the applications built in Laravel and there's querying being done, but there's some features not being used that Eloquent offers that could be? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yes,
is there a common thing that you see like, hey, you should use Eloquent for this, and people aren't doing it? Is there anything that stands out for you?
I have seen a lot of applications which like optimize it with Redis and all of that. In that case, people instead of using Eloquent, they do like simple SQL queries for their Laravel application and then have Redis do the advanced things that people think. But I think a lot of things, and people actually don't use all capabilities of Redis. So they would just do the same thing that Eloquent can offer, say caching queries and all of like any kind of frequent queries can be stored, which Eloquent already offers. But people don't know probably about it, so they go to Redis or other DB providers like those, and then add another layer which they again have to maintain. So I would
Right.
say a lot of capabilities are already there in Eloquent, and then you don't have to have another layer of code on top of your existing code. So
And
like, caching queries and all is what I've seen people not use Eloquent for.
Right. And so they're just like writing some raw SQL queries and then using Redis to directly cache it.
Yes.
Both things that you can do kind of out of the box with Laravel, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
A common one I've seen a lot too is and I've been guilty of it myself sometimes for sure, is not using the already defined relationships. And what I mean by that, for instance, is let's say the classic example: you have a user and you have a post model, and you have user has many posts, right? And so there's a lot of times I've seen in code bases where you're wanting to create a post for a given user, and instead of using the arrow, user arrow posts relationship to like create or save that new post, people would just have some code that just creates a post and sets the user ID. So it's kind of disconnected from the user a little bit, right? And I've run into problems where then the relationship's not loaded in a test and things like that. So you end up having to make an extra DB query to load that relationship. So I think leaning into like the relationships and how easy it is to define the relationships is really nice. I think leaning into and using those relationships whenever you're trying to make related data is one thing I see, and I've done myself not used enough for sure. Awesome.
Question of that, because from my understanding, Eloquent's great for like dealing like big data, so pulling in queries. So like I'm thinking about like sales teams that have to deal with a bunch of data to take a look at patterns and see what's kind of going on and decipher maybe something that could be helpful to them. There's so much like jam-packed into Eloquent that so many maybe sales teams are missing out on building tools for them. Is that something that you would say happens quite frequently?
Yes, 100%. So people don't, I think the thought process of people, even who are like Laravel developers, they don't think of Laravel to have a very strong handling capability for big data systems or real-time systems, and that they have to use things like Redis. But actually with Eloquent, especially like sales data, that is the use case that I had as well. So if you have constant data wherein you're say fetching results every week and then also trying to identify patterns, so then Eloquent serves really well. And I think that is also what I would like to share with everybody who's listening to us today, that Eloquent has a lot of features which can help you make decisions or predictions, which may or may not fall into, say, data science or machine learning. But if you're good with your queries, you can actually identify a lot of interesting insights, which if you just do it efficiently, you'll be able to find it. You don't need to know fancy concepts in order to do that. It's as simple as what can increase our sales. So just answer that question through your Eloquent queries. And that is a really nice use case.
Yeah, that's awesome. It makes it more eloquent. That's what I
Yes.
Awesome.
I got you. A general question too for you, Drishti. I've encountered a lot of situations where we're working on rebuilding a code base in Laravel, let's say, that maybe previously existed but not in Laravel, maybe not in a framework, and as a result, you get a lot of just raw SQL queries. So in the situation where, whatever the history is, you have some existing SQL queries, just raw MySQL queries, let's say, and you want to make them eloquent, so to speak. Do you have any advice for that process of how can I take a raw SQL query and convert it into eloquent?
Yeah, sure. No, that's a really nice question. And that is, I think, a very important question whenever somebody has to use Eloquent. So say you have a big query, I would say try and decompose that query into firstly the tables that the query is actually querying. So, and then those become your models in Laravel. So start from there as to what are the tables you're querying, have all of them in the front of your models, and then for the queries, try and find out similar functions which are supported by Eloquent, and then apply those. So that way, once you are following the structure of the way Eloquent is written, then you can perform advanced techniques on the Eloquent query. So if you're starting with a very big SQL query which is complex, find also the relationship. So you will maybe find a lot of like foreign keys, primary keys of the tables in your SQL, and that will help you identify what your relationship should be when you're writing an Eloquent query. So identifying those relationships there, mainly in the form of foreign keys, or if you're querying two things, or if you're joining two tables, then in that case also that is a relationship that you can bring to your Eloquent query. And if you just do this simple exercise, you will realize that a big complex MySQL query, which is literally not readable after say a month or so, becomes eloquent and readable with Eloquent queries. So it's time well spent.
Yeah, I think actually there's a similar theme there to what we were chatting with Types and Yaz in the previous talk of. I think there's something maybe what you said there. You don't have to introduce it all of Eloquent, I guess, so to speak, right? Because you can have, I'm picturing, an Eloquent query where you have a couple of joins and then maybe a where clause. And I've had situations where I've done something like that. And some of, like you said, some of those pieces, I've been able to figure out the joins very easily, right? This table joins to this table, and I can rewrite that in Eloquent. But then I've had situations where there's maybe a where condition on the query, and it's like more complex. And I'm not, at least initially, I'm not sure if I can do it in Eloquent or how to do it in Eloquent. And so you have the option then to just, if you need to, say where raw, right? And then pass in some raw. So you can kind of have like a partially Eloquent query with a little bit of raw in there as well. So I think there's that same concept there where you can like introduce it partially, right? Maybe you can get the query 80% of the way there with Eloquent, and then you have a little bit of raw, and then you can always figure that out afterwards. So that's really good advice to just like a lot of things, right? It can be overwhelming to look at some massive query, but just like take it, one step at a time, break it down into its component pieces and figure out how to transfer those over. And then I think too, the one thing you mentioned in your talk is really helpful is there's a number of ways you can do it to have the Eloquent builder output what is the SQL I've built up to this point, right? Because I find myself doing that a lot in those situations of like, looking in my database IDE, so to speak, or viewer, and then seeing what Eloquent's producing to make sure those queries line up, right? I'm actually querying what I want to query, because I think that sometimes is people's hesitation to use Eloquent if they don't know it well enough, is they're not really sure what the SQL being produced under the hood is, right? And as a result, they don't want to query something they're not sure about. And so I think there's a lot of ways we can easily output and give ourselves that assurance that the SQL being generated is what we're looking for, right?
Yes, 100%. And that will also help you kind of debug your query. In case you're missing something important, you'll see it right then and there instead of realizing it in prod, which is not a good place to realize it.
Absolutely, yeah. There was one question in the chat here. I'll throw it up here. And I think someone was wondering about your book specifically, if it's kind of geared towards Laravel 10 or 11, or if it's more just kind of general Laravel concepts, or...
It's mainly general Laravel concepts. The code snippet. So the book is like a 300-page book. So it starts and ends also teaching you to build a Laravel applications. So in that case, the code is specific to Laravel 10, but anywhere where it is specific to a version, I've mentioned it in the book right
Awesome.
below the code. So any new versions that come up, you can just plug and play it in and it will work.
Awesome. Cool. There was another thing I had. Sorry, I have a bunch of questions here. It's a great talk. You mentioned, and the one thing we get burned on sometimes is not eager loading relationships, and you get the classic N+1 problem, right? I load up 10 users, and they all have blog posts, and then I loop over them and load each of their blog posts individually, right? With
Yep.
resulting in 11 queries. So eager loading is a great way to avoid that, right?
Yes.
But the other kind of side of eager loading, which I don't always consider, is when you're doing it and you don't need to, right? The unnecessary eager loading. Do you have any thoughts or tips of like how to maybe, it feels like a difficult thing, but how can I detect when I'm unnecessarily eager loading data? Do you have any thoughts on that or tips for that?
Yep, sure.
Yeah.
So whenever, so I think I briefly mentioned it during the talk as well, that it's firstly, it's like business use case dependent. If your business use case, your query actually requires you to eager load, if you're querying it quite frequently, then you have to. But how do you decide when you should and when you should not? So my way of doing it is, based on your application, just decide the number that works for you. For example, it could be 10 queries. If I have these 10 queries and the models related to it to be eager loaded, that's fine for me, then stick to that. But if it is an application wherein 3 is the right number for you, so for queries like those, only then eager load them. I think it is very like business use case specific. One more thing, a tip that can help you make this decision is, how frequently are you going to be using whatever you have eager loaded? If it is going to be very frequent, like every 10 people, after every 10th user, that query is going to come in, then make use of it. But if it is rare, like say 100 users, even though 100 might feel a small number, but it can be done on the go, then don't eager load it. So making that decision on how frequently something is being queried on should help you make that decision.
Yeah. And I think having insight into your application through different,
Yes.
lots of different tools that can help you do that to know those things, right? Yeah.
Yep.
That's good advice. Another question from the chat here, and it's very just general, but tips for using chunks. And maybe you touched on this in your talk. That was awesome. For those that aren't aware, the chunk feature exists on the query builder that allows you to, if you have a lot of records, thousands or millions of records that you need to process, it's going to be sometimes impossible to query them all at once and load them all in memory at once so you can iterate over them. So the chunk feature allows you to basically query the database, as the name implies, in chunks, right? I can process 20 or 100 records at a time and then move on to the next chunk, right? Is that your understanding of how a chunk works, Drishti?
Yes.
And so just to the question here, do you have any general advice for using chunks and when you're chunking through data, of maybe something you've been burned by or things to avoid or think about?
Yeah, so one good way when you're thinking about using chunks is, you can also combine it with filter. So if you have a particular filter for, say, the type of users, even, or consider a case of it as like a housing market data, you can have a filter based on age. You can have the filter based on the area, the locality, and that could be the definition of your one chunk. And then you can like load records related to that into your application. So think about things which will help you break that bigger table into smaller things. And is there a common theme among those things? So you can create chunks based on that. That way, even later on, in case something else becomes more important, say locality becomes more important than the age of the homeowner, then you can modify retrieving your that chunk first than your age group chunk. So think about things which make that chunk unique and then iterate over it.
Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah, I just had one more general question. I don't know, is there any questions you saw in the chat there, Margaret, that we've missed?
There was one more, I guess, if you're still going to go for time, Drishti. Do you have a general rule for when to create a query scope for a model? And are there any patterns you may look for in the code?
Okay. There's no general rule. Like, it's your data set. So you are the best person to know your data set in and out and actually decide what your query scope should be like. And apart from that, I would say your query scopes are just like, I think it's very, apart from what I've already said, like, because you're going to be encapsulating anything that is like commonly used query constraints. So just think of it from the perspective of making your code to be much more cleaner. That could be one way of approaching it. If your data set looks same and you're not able to make a decision based on that, just think of what query scope will make my complex query look more cleaner and go from there.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, I think in my experience too, sometimes those query scopes are very small. They're just adding maybe a where clause or something, and if you kind of get a sense for it as you're moving around the code base, if you see the same clause being used in a bunch of places, that's a nice thing to extract to a query scope, and then makes it. I think I totally agree. Just it makes it more readable, and makes it easier to work with for a future developer for sure. All right. I just had one maybe general question to close us out. Once again, thanks for joining us today, Drishti. Some great info. And maybe the answer is no to this because it's so great. But is there any, as you've worked with Eloquent for a while, is there anything you've run into that Eloquent either doesn't do or maybe doesn't do as well as you'd like? Then it's sort of a future wish. I'd be love if Eloquent could also do this in the future. Is there anything that comes to mind, or is it perfect?
I use it a lot with real-time data applications. So if I have a lot of my data in the Kafka data stream and then bringing it to my application, I think I have to spend a lot of time in order to figure that out. If there were better ways of handling real-time data, then I think that would make my life much more easy. So yeah, maybe a future wish would be that.
All right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you once again for joining us, Drishti. Lots of great information there.
Thank you for having me.
Got a couple of links in the chat there to your book, Ultimate Laravel. Check that out on Amazon if you like Drishti's talk, and also have a look for Drishti at a conference near you. I think you said you've got a few speaking engagements coming up in the next couple of months. So all the best with those, and hope to have you back on the show sometime.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Have a great day, Drishti. We'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Take care.
All right, two information-packed talks this month once again. Lots of great info there. Yeah, definitely some stuff. I think good talks for me are always talks where I can take something away right away and use on my day-to-day. And I think I got something out of both of the talks today. So thank you once again for Yaz and Drishti for joining us. And before we depart, we've just got some closing stuff to take care of here. Let's look ahead to next month. Margaret, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. So yeah, next month, we're really excited to welcome Marty Friedel and Max Broekman to the stage. They're going to be doing some great talks, building maintainable websites with Statamic, and then also a to be determined talk from Max. So stay tuned for that. We're going to be here the last Tuesday of September, and we'll actually be doing our meetup at 9 a.m. this time. I mean, Marty's from Australia and Max is from England. So there's a lot of things going on, a lot of time zones. So we're really excited to have them. So thank you so much for joining us next month. And then again, if you did not scan the QR code earlier, here it is again. Again, this is the YouTube video, so you can go back as well. But if you want to enter our giveaway, we're giving away a JetBrains IDE, 1-year subscription to any IDE that they have there. That's what you can win. So just take a picture of that QR code, fill in the details, and you'll be entered into our draw. And we'll announce our winner at the end of the first week of September. Here's some other details. So again, September 3rd is when we're going to be doing the draw. And again, how to stay connected. Remember to sign up for email reminders on the Laravel Worldwide Meetup website at meetup.laravel.com, where you'll get a reminder for every meetup so you won't miss them. Or again, you can just check us out on YouTube, which is the next slide there, to be able to rewatch any of your favorite talks, maybe go into a little bit more detail. And subscribe to find out some more. And one last thing that I also wanted to mention, again, so you can follow us on X at Laravel Meetup, Laravel WW Meetup, and for all Laravel WW Worldwide Meetup updates, make sure to go to the website, find the details here. And the last thing I wanted to add is that Dan and I are going to be at Laracon next week doing some mini interviews with anybody that comes up to us and says hi. What we want to know is, what do you want to see on this meetup? And what other speakers do you want to maybe hear more from? We'll be doing our rounds, talking to everyone that's at the conference. So we're excited to see everybody. So please say hi if you do see us and want to tell us about what you want to see on this channel.
Absolutely. Very much looking forward to Laracon US for those attending next week. To catch up with some old friends and meet some people I haven't had a chance to meet in person before. I was looking, like I mentioned earlier, looking at the weather there. It's going to be stinking hot, 40 degrees Celsius, about 95 Fahrenheit. So dress accordingly, come prepared, but I'm very much looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing you there. And thanks once again to Yaz and Drishti for joining us this month and providing two great talks as usual. So until we see you on the next one, I'll see some of you at Laracon next week, and we'll see some of you next month at the end of September. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.